Welcome everyone at this session of Studium Generale. AI is rapidly evolving. I don't think I have to explain this. Yesterday we had the DeepSeek Chinese AI tool popping up, amazing the world, amazing the stock markets also. AI is used more and more in the military services, on the battlefield. You know this from Ukraine, you know this from Israel and the Middle East. AI proves very, very useful in the battlefield. It's super fast and never tired. AI on the battlefield raises many, many ethical dilemmas. Luckily, we have two experts to address these dilemmas and to discuss them with us. Frank Slijper from Pax, maybe you can wave with your hand, that's Frank. I will introduce him a bit more broadly later on. And we have Ilse Verdiese. I'm very happy you're here, and we kick off with your lecture. Ilse, let me introduce you. You have been with the Dutch Army for 30 years, this year, 30 years. She has been on missions to Bosnia, to Afghanistan. Last year she defended her PhD thesis at the TU Delft, and this thesis is about human oversight over autonomous weapons. So that's exactly addressing the issue we want to discuss this night. You have been promoted to colonel recently, that's why she has 3 stars on her shoulder. That's a very interesting promotion. And you are head of the Science and Technology Department of the Ministry of Defense. So I'm very happy you're here and you're willing to address AI on the battlefield. So a big hand for Ilse Verdiese.
Well, yeah, thank you for the kind introduction and for you all being here, either in presence or online. I started this topic about 8 years ago, and 6 years. My PhD took 6 years. I did it part-time next to my job. And 80 years ago, this topic was hypothetical, a little bit futuristic. We thought that it might happen. We see the dangers, but it won't go as fast as the people who are seeing all the dangers thought it would be. But we've been surprised by the speed of the development, the technological developments, and it remains important and it remains relevant to talk about it. So I'm very happy that I'm here, and I will address a little bit the what is AI from how I researched it, what are the recent developments, and then I'll go slightly through the UN debate, which Frank will go more to in depth, to my PhD research. Let's see, yeah. So last week I Googled AI in the news, and we had already a lot of interesting hits, and then this weekend the whole DeepSeek news items came popping up, and those I even didn't incorporate in my presentation, because AI news is happening so fast. The technology developments are happening very fast, and it also raises a lot of ethical questions. Either it's that LinkedIn is trying to use our personal messages to train their AI on. Apple withdrew one of its AI products from its iPhone 16, which generated a lot of fake news. It gave news summaries and attributed certain news items to the BBC, which were absolutely not is it true? So that they were just fake news. So you see that it's still really relevant, and it pops up a lot. But if you delve into what is AI, it's much more than just machine learning. That's what we see in the news a lot. We see a lot of large language models like ChatGPT or DeepSeek, but AI is much more than that. And some researchers have tried to define it and see what is, or how could you view AI. And it's actually a machine that shows intelligent behavior and can select an action based on an observation in its environment, and then act on that based on that observation. And there's of course a philosophical debate going on, what is intelligent behavior? Because everybody, you can look at that from different points of view. And if you look at the characteristics, which they have drawn into literature, if they've written out, these three are mentioned a lot. It's a system that should be adaptable. It has interactivity and autonomy. It basically means it can change its own state. And if you're in a computer science department or studies, then you know that that's something, you program something and then an AI system will actually update that program. That's very different than from a regular computer science program. But when you talk about artificial intelligence, we often, what I said, are thinking about machine learning or large language models. But it's a lot more. There are several different subfields that are trying to create or recreate human intelligence. And then you have something that we as humans do very easily, like problem solving, reasoning, interacting with our environment, natural language processing and perception, dus vision and imaging, and all that combined is what experts say, okay, that is artificial intelligence. And that has a lot of different subfields like planning, robotics, translation, vision, reinforcement learning, decision making, and on all those topics you see a lot of acceleration in technology. So the whole field in itself is evolving very quickly. And if you look at AI in the military domain, we have been using automated systems. It's not exactly AI, but we have been using automated systems for a long time. The Goalkeeper is already 20 years old. The Patriot air defense system, I think it might also be 20 years old, and all those systems can actually take out targets based on certain parameters and rule-based behavior. So if I see a certain missile coming in and I cannot identify it as my own missile or a friendly force missile, then I will take it out. In the Netherlands, we always have a human in the decision-making loop using those systems. So in the Patriot system, there's somebody clearing the target or checking if it's correct, and the same goes for the Goalkeeper on the ships. But in principle, these systems can be used more automatically without the human in the loop. Currently, we don't use that, but there are scenarios where you might want to increase the speed of your reaction, or the threat level is increasing. We see right now a lot of activity on the North Sea. You never know what happens next, but it should be, and that's also what I say in the military, it should also be a very conscious choice if you remove that human interaction from your weaponry. But more recently, we've seen an increase in AI technologies on the battlefield. And it's due to the conflict in the Ukraine, where we use a lot of data science, or they use a lot of data science to train their models. There are a lot of sensors and imaging going on, a lot of intelligence systems who were collecting image, and if you just Google this, you can see, okay, there's a lot of activity going on. We must learn what are they doing, because it's not just that you want to be able to have those technology for yourself, it's more also what are we going to encounter when we are when we have to be in conflict as the Dutch MOD ourselves. You have to know what you will be encountering from your opponent. So you have to make sure that you have those technologies. You have to know how it works, what you can expect, and how you should react to them. So that was already a couple of years ago my driver to dive into this topic. So I know, okay, I've seen what is AI, I've seen the military domain, how will that interact? There's a lot of discussion going on. And then I started first a master's graduation and then a PhD on it. My first idea is then, okay, you'll take the definition of an autonomous weapon system, a weapon system with AI, and then I'll go from there. Well, during my master's I found there are a lot of definitions on an autonomous weapon system, because how you define it, it's actually a sort of political standpoint if you are against it or if you can actually use it or not. If you define it very broadly, like it's a human-like intelligence, then you can say we're never going to have that, so we're opposing it. But that also gives you a lot of room to actually use less human-like technologies in your weapon systems. The AIVCAF, that's a Dutch organization, has given their policy recommendation, and they use this definition, and they restated that definition a couple of years ago. I think 2021, every 5 years they update their policy document. And it's actually, and I use this definition because it also, it has an engineering perspective and a military perspective in one, is that it's a weapon without human intervention, selections and engages targets, but it's also based on predefined criteria. There's always a human defining a weapon and programming a weapon, because no weapon will launch itself to take out a target. But it's also, so that it follows a human decision, but once launched you cannot stop the attack. That's basically the principle of an autonomous weapon system. And these are weapon systems, the pictures that are supposed or claim to be autonomous. I was also privileged to go a couple of times to the UN to see the whole, experience the whole discussion that's going on there, and Frank will go more into that. But there's a lot of debate on who is responsible, and that's also what Peter just said, who's responsible, who's accountable, and we have discussed a couple of principles. We have now 11 guiding principles for autonomous weapon systems. They drafted those at the UN. However, when I took this for my research, I started to wonder, but what is responsibility? What do we mean with accountability? And the first chapter of my PhD is diving into those definitions. One thing you also very often hear is we have to have human control or meaningful human control over the weapon systems. And I also think, I started wondering, but what do we mean by meaningful human control? When is control meaningful? Is there something like meaningful machine control or unmeaningful human control? But those were the questions I was asking myself at the start of my PhD. And I delved more into that. And Ibo van der Poel, who was also a professor here at Delft, at Twente, has written papers about it and defined very well what is responsibility, what is accountability. And if you look into public administration literature, business literature, then you find also common oversight mechanisms. That's, we have like a raad van bestuur and a raad van toezicht, a board of governance at companies. So there are a lot of business administration principles that are already in place, but not yet transferred to the military domain. And that led me to propose a framework for human oversight. So I will go into that a little bit more later on my framework, but to have direct control over a weapon system, and we saw the definition of an autonomous weapon system, because once you launch it, you cannot intervene. My proposition is hypothesis is you cannot have direct control over a weapon system, so you need some sort of oversight mechanism, because you cannot stop it once you've launched it, or you have to program something in that you can actually intervene. But then you can question, is it an autonomous weapon or not? So I tried to broaden the view from meaningful human control to a more governance perspective, and came up with a framework in which, in all of those, I've defined 3 layers. A technical layer, which is more or less a normal engineering perspective, like you have an input before deployment. Those are the columns. you have a feedback mechanism during deployment and an output after deployment. Most technical systems have some sort of feedback mechanism with inputs and outputs. So it's very generic. Secondly, I've defined a socio-technical layer. That's where you find the meaningful human control part. It's the interaction between man and machine. So we have a technical system, the human starts using it, and then the system starts having a certain behavior. And there you can have some control mechanisms. And finally, on top, let's see if we can, the governance layer, that's often not in the discussion on autonomous weapon systems, because we very much tend to focus on the technical system itself, or maybe the human interaction, but not how do you create a system or a process on top of that to actually have oversight on it. And to specify beforehand, so before deployment, what you want from the inputs from a system. And the same during deployment and after deployment. And there's a white spot on the top governance layer during deployment, because I could not find in literature any governance mechanism. So that's still a question, open question for research, and I hope somebody finds something. And at the end of my PhD, I researched the whole literature and still could not find it. So would be nice if somebody could find something to fill that gap. If you then look at an autonomous weapon system in which we defined it, or I defined it like there's no ongoing control because there's no human intervention once we have launched it, then during deployment, in the social technical layer, you'll create another gap. In literature, philosophical literature, this is often referred to an accountability gap. So the human is not able to intervene, the weapon is still launched. What do we do with this black box? And another, in a research group for my supervisor, they were actually, I will not go too much in depth, but build a glass box over that black box, that gap here. So if we build a glass box over this middle column during deployment, do we then still want to have control during deployment, or can we build a system that we monitor the inputs and outputs? And I started working on that. Because then during deployment, you will start monitoring and observing what does the weapon do, and this black box represents the system, the human interaction, which is no longer there. And can you then verify at the end what happened? With the final goal to, if something goes wrong, or we have a bad decision, or we have unintended consequences, or an output that we did not want or did not foresee, how can we make sure that that won't happen again? How can we make sure that we program the weapon or take action to prevent those unintended consequences? And all in that to remain accountable when you start using this type of weapon systems. That's in a nutshell, very nutshell, my PhD. It's very much based on literature and based on the current, combining certain disciplines. The big question is, how do we use this in practice? Because it's very nice, I've written it down, you can read it, but in practice we see the developments in Ukraine, in Gaza, going very, very fast. How do you remain in control of those type of weapon systems? That's still open for research. I know some people, some master students are working on it. I also know that they're working on it in the Ministry of Defense, who work with those master students, but it's still not fully operationalized. Well, if you want to read it more comprehensively, you can, it's online, my thesis. I'm very much in favor of open access, so I try to make sure that everything is available online, and not behind some paywall, and have a lot of references. And by that I want to conclude it, because we also have another very interesting speaker.
Thank you very much, Ilse. Big hand for Ilse. Thank you. Yes. This is for me. Ilse, perhaps a very short question, and then we go to Frank. And of course, we have lots of time for discussion afterwards. You showed the Patriot missile machine and the goalkeeper.
Yeah.
Those are typically, I think, defensive weapons.
Yes.
They are purely there to protect a country against incoming missiles. Can you say a little bit more about offensive weapons? And are they being used by the Dutch Ministry of Defense already?
Not autonomously.
No,
so we don't
like
have
drones or something like
no,
that.
but
yeah.
we do have drones.
Yes.
And what you see in the Ukraine is that they are being weaponized and
Yes.
used offensively,
Yes. Yeah.
and also with autonomous functions. So they're not autonomous per se, and maybe Frank has some other examples, but you see
Mhm.
that they can navigate autonomously, or I'm not quite sure if they already can find targets autonomously,
Mhm.
but you see the developments going on a lot.
Yeah.
In
yeah,
the
yeah.
Netherlands, there's still a lot of debate in if we want. Currently, the policy standpoint is we're not developing autonomous weapons or
Mm.
using them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not using them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's difference between defensive weapon and offensive weapon. You make the distinction very clearly at the army, or
No, what I more look at is which scenarios might a weapon be used, and
Mhm.
which environments. And there's I think a big difference at an environment in sea where there's no humans present, or
Mhm.
you're in an urban area.
Mhm. Yeah. yeah.
And then we also have the international humanitarian law, which we have to abide by.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of difficult issues with these type of weapons if you use them offensively. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Frank will also comment on that. Ilse, thank you very much. Please take your seat. I will introduce Frank Slijper. He works at PAX. He is a project leader arms trade at PAX. He's an economist by origin, so to say, who follows the money, if I may put it that way, in the world of arms. That's also a very fascinating field of expertise. But very important, Frank is also specialized in autonomous weapons. Killer robots, they are called by PAX. PAX has a 10 reasons to ban the killer robots manifesto. I don't know if you wrote part of it, but you know a lot about it. Frank, come here. I want a big hand for Frank. And I will... Okay.
Thank you, and happy to see so many people here. As Peter just introduced, my background is at PAX. I'm an economist. I graduated some 32 years ago with a thesis on the Patriot air defense missile system, but on the economic side of it, when we bought it, we also wanted to have some positive industrial effects from it. So some deals were arranged that Fokker in Hogeveen could produce part of the canisters for the missile. And the theme of the thesis was to look what are the extra costs of this and what are the benefits of it. The conclusion was inconclusive, to be honest, because I wasn't able to get too much into the details, because for a large part they were secret or they were commercially sensitive. But that was my little background with the Patriot missile. Then after some 10 years working at a small peace organization, specifically focusing on the arms trade, an organization that is called today Stop Wapenhandel, I moved 11 years ago to PAX. And for those of you who don't know PAX, PAX is the not the oldest peace organization, I should say, but it was set up in the years after the Second World War as Pax Christi, Sometime later, IKV, the Interchurch Peace Council, was set up, and they merged in, I believe, 2007 or 8, and then changed the name in 2014 into simply PAX. And I have some 100 colleagues working with me. We have our headquarters in Utrecht, and also people working in offices in countries such as South Sudan, in Iraq, and also in New York and Brussels. A large part of my colleagues are working together with peace organizations in conflict-affected countries. We work in some 12 countries with local peace-building organizations. And the team that I work in is a team that is focused mostly on arms control. And as Peter already mentioned, much of my work is related to the arms trade, looking into the treaties that are supposed to regulate the arms trade. And also I've been working on this issue of autonomous weapons that we're here for today. And I must say, we do this not on our own, because we believe that as I mean, not a small organization, but as a single organization, it's not very effective to work on your own. It's much more effective to do that together in coalitions. And we've always done that in the area of arms control already back in the 1990s on the issue of landmines with the International Campaign to Ban Landmines. Later on also working towards a treaty on cluster munitions, and also, for example, on the as part of ICAN, the International Coalition to abolish nuclear weapons. And these coalitions have been very successful. They were part of the reason that treaties were agreed after all. And for that reason, for example, the campaign to ban landmines and the campaign to abolish nuclear weapons received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997 and 2017, respectively. And that's also how we work on the issue of autonomous weapons or killer robots, as Peter mentioned. We were one of the co-founding organizations back in 2012 for the campaign to stop killer robots. And this campaign today consists of more than 250 organizations worldwide, coming from more than 70 different countries. And you saw the few slides that Ilse started with. It's not difficult today to read the news and see some very rapidly changing developments in the news in the area of artificial intelligence, but also more specifically the military use of artificial intelligence. And I just wanted to mention a few developments that I encountered in the news over the past month. Last week, in one of his first major announcements, US President Donald Trump announced Stargate, a $500 billion AI infrastructure project to be funded jointly by OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank, which will build essential data centers and computer infrastructure for the development of artificial intelligence in the United States. The same week, it was revealed that Microsoft had deepened its ties with the Israeli military, with Microsoft frequently tasked with working on sensitive and highly classified projects, with its staff also working closely with the Israeli Defense Forces Intelligence Directorate. Meanwhile, the same week it was also disclosed that Google had raced to beat Amazon to sell AI tools to the Israeli armed forces. A bit earlier this month, US-based AI military startup Anduril, a company that is focused specifically on autonomy and weapon systems, announced that it's building a new 1 billion factory in Ohio that could eventually produce tens of thousands of autonomous systems and weapons each year, so they claim. Anduril is closely connected to the Trump administration. It's woven into the network of tech leaders who supported its campaign and won appointments in its administration. And Trump's new White House artificial intelligence czar is a significant investor in this company. And similarly, US Vice President G.D. Vance invested in Anduril in his previous career as a venture capitalist. Late last year, Anduril unveiled its Bolt M UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, which it claims has onboard software to automate the flight behaviors required to accurately track and strike a target. In Silicon Valley, the move fast and break things motto implies that problems that arise in the rollout of tech can always be addressed and solved later on. But in the world of defense and war, the harm produced by this kind of risk-taking cannot so easily be undone. While many of the military AI tools mentioned above may be considered as administrative in function and are not necessarily autonomous weapons, these and similar systems raise significant moral, ethical, and legal concerns. And the current direction of travel for military AI use is startlingly clear. So then, what are autonomous weapons? Of course, you just saw Ilse's definition that she used from the Adviesraad Internationale Vraagstukken. This is slightly similar, and I must say, of course, we independently prepared our presentation, so I did not know what she would present and vice versa. But I think this is a slightly different definition, and I can go through it a little bit quicker. But the ICRC is the International Committee for the Red Cross, one of the most important actors in the disarmament debate internationally. They have defined autonomous weapons as systems which select and apply force to targets without human intervention, and where an autonomous weapon system self-initiates or triggers a strike in the response to information from the environment received through sensors and on the basis of a generalized target profile. These systems use machine analysis of information acquired from sensors that automatically select and engage targets, such that a human operator does not specifically determine where, when, and against what target force is applied. ICRC also says that autonomous weapons are qualitatively different to other weapon systems because it's an algorithm that makes the decision for the machine to use force and to engage a target based on the data that it gets from sensors, instead of a human, a soldier, that is making this decision. And as the ICRC also points out, it's the victim that triggers the strike, not the user. And so those who develop, configure, deploy autonomous weapons will not necessarily know the exact targets, location, timing, or the circumstances of the resulting use of force. And again, as mentioned, when I started looking into this 10 years ago, there was people laughing like, artificial intelligence, we've been talking about it for decades, and a computer cannot even distinguish a cat from a dog. And that was indeed difficult, if not impossible, 10 years ago. But look 10 years further and you see how quickly these developments have changed. And so we see that also in how this is adopted in the military technology, where weapon systems that use these sensors can cover a larger geographical area for a longer time, and not just in very simple environments that you just saw with the goalkeeper of the Patriot missile, where it's quite clear what the target is, and very different from a very complex environment, such as in a town or in a populated area. And so, with all these advances in artificial intelligence, and specifically in the area of machine learning, there is a trend towards increased autonomy in various functions of weapon systems. In very uncontroversial parts, such as autonomous takeoff and landing by an aircraft, but also in what is called the critical functions, such as target selection and the application of force. And so the expanded scope of independent operations has raised concerns, as were mentioned, regarding how human control is applied to these weapon systems and how these weapon systems are understood to be sufficiently predictable and understandable. Very briefly again, some people might say, hey, but we have landmines for many years. They're also autonomous weapons because there's no human involved in that. It's true, but it's not really intelligence. It's just a sensor that reacts to pressure in this case, and it's also a very controversial weapon. That is why these discussions started around landmines that ended in a treaty to ban them, because they are indiscriminate. They are in violation of the rules that we have agreed in international humanitarian law, the law of war, where it said that weapons should be able to discriminate between combatants and non-combatants, and with landmines it was clear that so many of the victims were in fact civilians and not combatants. With air defense systems, also no problem. Yes, there is a limited form and could be more advanced of autonomy, but as Ilse explained, the environment is quite predictable. Yes, accidents and even deliberate actions may happen that are not defensive of nature. We've seen that with, I always forget, MH17 that was shot down over Ukraine in 2014. With the Patriot in the beginning, mistakes were also made, but over time these accidents have happened less and less because the system could adapt over time. Again, with drones, we see that there are a lot of questions around the use of drones, but these are more, I mean, and there's a lot of overlap in the sort of questions in discussions on the use of drones, where, for example, the issue of that using violence from a distance may lower the threshold to use violence because it's low risk for the attacking army or soldier, but that's not necessarily an issue of autonomy. At the same time, we see drones themselves becoming more and more autonomous, so there you see how it's not just the reduce or the increased distance between the fighter and the weapon, but also that the weapon itself becomes more and more independent and more able to be used independently. I have 3 examples of what we currently see in the developments of weapons that at least are promoted by the producer as having a lot of autonomous functions. This one is from an Israeli company, Elbit Systems. It's called the Lanius, and it's what is called a loitering munition. It's more popularly known, also called a kamikaze drone. It's a drone that's meant to attack and explode on impact of the target. And this is the type of weapons where we see these developments going most rapidly, and where we see the use of autonomous functions most clearly happening. According to the company, it's able to autonomously scout and map buildings and points of interest for possible threats. And Elbit also claims that it's capable of identifying people autonomously, and it can distinguish between armed men who may pose a threat and unarmed civilians. And of course it is a lethal weapon. Another one is a Russian, also a loitering munition called the Lancet, developed by Kalashnikov and Zala, 2 Russian companies. Again, the company claim, and again, it's not always easy to check these claims, because companies have an interest to exaggerate their claims, because it's their business. They need to make bold claims, sometimes to sell their weapons. But they claim that it's a smart, multi-purpose weapon capable of autonomously finding and hitting a target. And recent reports also claim that the company has developed a version that's able to attack in swarms, and so with 4 or 8 or 12 of these weapons at the same time, and operating in together to attack a certain target or some targets together. A third one by a company that I earlier mentioned, Anduril, a relatively young company, but that is making a lot of money at the moment in the United States. And they have a family of loitering munitions called the Altheus, and this company claims that it's an autonomous weapon, and one operator is able to control multiple of these weapons, and it has demonstrated autonomous coordinated strike, target recognition, and collaborative teaming. And the founder of the company last year, 2 years ago, told reporters that one of these variants has been equipped with autonomy. Previously, a guy would steer it around using a remote control and a screen, but we've made it where one person can manage 1 or 2 dozen of the drones on its own. So these are 3 out of dozens of these sort of systems that are being developed. We see them also being developed for use at sea or on land. Robot tanks that with various degrees of autonomy can find their way. Until now, these systems are a bit less useful because the terrain is more difficult. It's much easier, of course, to fly for a drone than it is for a tank to go over difficult terrain. But the expectation is that what we see being developed now for use in the air at some point will also be used for land use or sea use or otherwise. Yep, what is the problem of all of this? Because we clearly see those problems, and these problems are not just seen by us, but are part of the debate at the United Nations, for example. Broadly, we see four main categories of problems. Some also mentioned by Ilse before. Legal accountability, who is responsible for the attack, and especially if civilians are being attacked. Is it the developer of the weapon? Is it the company that produces it? Is it the weapon itself, or is it the commander that at some point decided to put this system to use? For us as a peace organization, very important issue is the ethical part, and we believe that it is key that weapons, machines are never used to make decisions over life and death on its own. This is something that can only be done, should only be done by humans. As we see weapons becoming more and more autonomous, we call this digital dehumanization, and we also see in opinion polls, for example, that this is an issue that for most people is unacceptable, is considered as unethical. The security is another important issue because we believe that these technologies are becoming more and more easily available because the technology itself is relatively simple. And it means that what we see happening today in current conflicts can be adapted by not only militaries across the world, but also by armed groups, terrorist groups, and that is a reason why we believe it's so important to regulate the issue of autonomous weapons. Last but not least, one of the other big concerns is what is called algorithmic bias and unpredictability that is almost inherent to a lot of artificial intelligence, that it is flawed by a lot of data that are put into the algorithm and that are causing discrimination in the use of the algorithm. This is not something that is concerning Pax alone. These concerns are actually quite widely shared by diplomats, academics, and humanitarian organizations. For example, the current and previous UN Secretary Generals have called this as a very urgent issue to address, and also the ICRC, as earlier mentioned, is one of the key very focal voices in this debate. And a year ago, quite uniquely, the UN Secretary General, together with the ICRC, released a joint declaration. And in that declaration, the UN Secretary General and the ICRC said, we must act now to preserve human control over the use of force. Human control must be retained in life and death decisions. The autonomous targeting of humans by machines is a moral line that we must not cross. Machines with the power and discretion to take lives without human involvement should be prohibited by international law. And the appeal at the same time calls for the start of negotiations of a specific prohibitions and regulations that should be concluded by 2026, so in 2 years' time. And the statement implores states to take decisive action now to protect humanity. So quite a serious and urgent call from two very important organizations. And it's not only coming from that area, it's also AI experts themselves who have for many years called for regulation. In 2018, I believe, over 2,000 AI experts warned for the dangers of the weaponization of artificial intelligence and urged states to speed up talks towards a treaty. Including among these AI experts were computer science professors such as Stuart Russell, Toby Walsh, and not least Geoffrey Hinton, last year awarded with the Nobel Prize in Physics. It's not only these people, it's actually also states who in large majority believe that there must be a treaty to ban and regulate autonomous weapons. As you can see from this slide, last October, November actually, 5 November, there was a vote at the UN General Assembly voting on a statement to a resolution on autonomous weapons was adopted with 161, it says here, but later on some states that weren't present in the room were added to the resolution. So actually it was 166 UN member states supported this resolution that urges states to start talking and negotiating a treaty. So you would say, if everybody thinks this is something to work on urgently, it shouldn't be too difficult. The fact is that over the last 10 years, these debates have been ongoing. They started in Geneva, where the disarmament part of the UN community mostly meets, and that's where this discussion started at a treaty that it's called the CZW, the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, as it's called. And there we have had these talks for 10 years. I've been there, not all the years, but quite a number of times. And the problem in Geneva has always been that in the CCW, there's only agreement by consensus. So if there's one state that disagrees with a proposal or a way forward, then it's blocked and nothing happens. And that's why it's so important that now for 2 years, this discussion is moving to New York, to the UN General Assembly, and their consensus is not needed. A clear majority is sufficient to continue and start talks and negotiations for a treaty. So there is hope that with this support now in New York, so clearly that may be the start of treaty negotiations a bit sooner. That's maybe, you may ask yourself, what's actually the difference between the Ministry of Defense and PAX on this issue? This is one of the issues where PAX at least disagrees with the delegation of the Dutch government, that they want to stick to Geneva, even though they know that there's not a lot of progress to be made there, and that a treaty will never succeed there. But still they stick to their goal to discuss this in Geneva and yeah, not so much outside there. Then finally, how could a treaty look like? I think with all the discussions that we've seen happening at the UN, this could be like the broad framework. All the precise definitions need to be negotiated, but there's rather broad agreement that the treaty should on the one hand contain prohibitions, for example, autonomous weapons that target people. That's one of the issues that you hear a lot of states speaking of in favor, and also autonomous weapon systems that cannot be controlled meaningfully. So that's on the prohibition side, and all the other autonomous weapon systems should be subject to positive obligations to make sure that that meaningful human control can be exercised over these weapons. So there must be specific limitations as to what sort of targets, limitations to the time and the space that a weapon can operate, the environment in which it operates, and how the interaction between a human and the machine is agreed. So to conclude, developments in the area of AI and autonomous weapons are taking place at a very rapid pace. New applications, faster decision making, and important consequences for the quality and legality of the decision making. And at the same time, we see a growing distance between humans and the weapons, the autonomous weapons. That is why we believe it's very important that countries finally start moving towards a treaty that will effectively control and restrict autonomous weapons. Humans must continue to keep control over the use of violence. States must recognize the urgent need for meaningful human control and for prohibitions on anti-personnel autonomous weapons. States have a responsibility in this moment of multilateral fragility to strengthen the rules-based order and to take steps to safeguard humanity from automated violence. Thank you for your attention, and happy to have some questions.
Yes. Frank, thank you very much. Please remain standing. Ilse, you might also come to the stage. I come with a microphone to you. I think you have lots of questions. I have one first question. I read about Israel, and they used a program called Lavender. It's not an autonomous weapon, but it is an AI system identifying possible Hamas suspects. They also used a program called Where's Daddy, and that's also an AI tool which scans the whole environment. I don't know how exactly it works, but it pinpointed possible Hamas targets. And then they sent a conventional drone or a conventional bomb at the home of these people. So that's not an autonomous weapon, but you see AI intervening in the battlefield. How does this fit in this treaty, for instance? There's some gray area around it. Could you comment on this, please?
On the one hand, you may say that very recent developments have overtaken the discussions that we've had for a long time, because clearly, as you say, these are not autonomous weapons, but you see that the decision making is sped up,
accelerated
a lot, and where they said that normally there would be 50 targets a year, that's now 100 targets per month, I believe. So the problem is similar in the sense that there's a problem with the AI and with the understandability of the AI. Also the pressure on the soldiers that you hear from the Israeli soldiers. They need to make decision at such a fast pace that it's basically impossible to really make a proper assessment. So yes, the violence itself is used the way it's always been used, with snipers and with heavy bombs and not so heavy bombs. But the information that is feeding the soldiers is basically at least not ready tested to standards that we have under international
No.
law, and,
No.
and that's what we've, I think, also clearly seen in the war. It's not been a surgical war, and Israel has of
No.
course been willing to take many civilian casualties as a consequence.
Mhm. Yeah.
Don't know.
Ilse, how do you see
Yeah,
this issue?
I've
You-
also, I think we've read the same article. You see that the use of AI speeds up the targeting process.
Yes.
So that's a decision-making process within the military that we have.
Yeah.
But also that you see that the human conscious decision to assign a target is getting very, I think it put, how much time did he have? Like 30 seconds or something
Mhm.
to clear a target.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's definitely not. Yeah, that's definitely not meaningful human control.
No,
It's almost like a machine process or like a cookie fabric.
Yes. yeah,
That's
yeah,
not what a targeting process is
Mm.
intended to, because you have to make a very conscious decision on which targets, which means of operation you use, which type of weapons, what do you want to achieve, which effect do you achieve, is
Yeah.
it a military target? So
Yeah. Yeah.
this does not contribute to that.
No,
No.
I understand. But I think your intentions, the two of you, is, I think that's very important and very good to make regulations to regulate these kind of technologies. But aren't you constantly surpassed by the speed of the development of these technologies, because it evolves so quickly? Isn't that frustrating, or
You see it actually, regulation always lags behind
yes.
any technological development.
Yeah, yeah.
And especially when you start specifying regulations to certain technologies, it happens very quickly.
Mm.
So that would actually be a call to lawyers to make it more generic, that incorporates more technology. You can look a little bit to the future and see what's coming towards you, and
Mhm.
not be too. That's the problem with law. It's always specific, reactive,
yes,
and it
yeah,
always
yeah.
lags behind. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also because that's what you see in diplomacy. Most countries
Yeah, you showed it very clear.
support
Yeah.
the treaty, but it's mostly the main military powers that block
Russia,
it, because
China block it.
they're
yeah.
involved in,
Yeah.
in an arms race between
Yeah.
them. And
And there you go. Okay, I'll get the mic. I have many more questions, but there will be questions in the audience, I suppose. Please, go ahead.
Disarmament is very good, of course. It would be great help when all the armies in the world would be half as effective as they are now. But I distrust the reasons against the autonomous weapons systems, because human armies may operate very machine-like, and the human in control may be a Putin or a terrorist, whereas technology, when you put enough money in it, can be very reliable. In most man-machine systems, machines are the last safety layer, and not humans, because humans are not very reliable.
Interesting comment. Do you, so you are basically saying that technology is you often read it, algorithms are cool, rational, precise, and human beings are emotional, they have anger, and they are feared, and then they make weird decisions leading to disasters.
Those are not very reliable, but
Yeah.
can be made quite reliable.
Yeah, technology can be made reliable more than human beings. Do you agree?
I
On this?
agree. Partially, it's humans are tired and make bad decisions. We always think that humans make perfect decisions, and that's
no.
not the case.
No,
I know that
no.
from experience.
Mm.
We are more forgiving when a human makes a bad decision. That's also been researched than a machine,
Machine, yeah.
because we can punish a human and it can have guilt and
Mm.
feel bad about it, and a machine does not.
Mm.
So there's something to say, definitely for programming machines into certain areas or certain functions. The problem, if you look from a design of technology perspective, is often that the human, with all its biases, programs the machines. And also, for example, if you look at training data, if we train on certain characteristics, or if we take, for example, we train on a data set with all with engineers, then you probably have more men than women, so there's already a bias in the data set.
Mm.
So you need to be very consciously in how you program it. But yeah, so I partly agree with you that you can have better decisions by machines, but it's not always the case. Yeah.
Not perfect. Frank, would you like to comment on this?
I think in parallel, what we heard in the early 90s with the Gulf War, when we for the first time started using smart munitions, the prediction was also that war would be killing less civilians, would be more human. And I think what we've seen is that this is not the case, because we're easier using them because of the illusion of precision and the illusion of that the strike is limited. But then we see many of these missiles and bombs being used with the same effect, that whole towns and cities are completely destroyed. And I think the parallel goes with robotics and autonomous weapons. And also theoretically it could be true that over time they may be developed but the opposite could also be true, that they may be developed to do the most inhumane things. And that's why I think it's so important to regulate them.
Thanks. We come back to the regulations later. There are many questions. Go ahead, please.
Yes, so I have actually a bit of a follow-up question to the question that was just asked, and that is if you could use AI not per se in the case of like autonomous weapons, but if you could think of a system that could assist the humans in the battlefield. So for example, what my mind went to was Google Glasses, but something that during the live situations would assist and give feedback on what the soldiers, for example, would be doing. So they could use an assisted targeting system, but give the feedback to actual humans who would make the final decision. Would still the same kind of ethical questions be applied to it, or would this be a totally different situation of using AI entirely?
Thanks. Good question. Ilse, can you comment on this?
Yeah, so then you would still have the human making the decision, but it's assisted by AI. That's what you mean. Yeah, it's not we're not with the target selection, but we're starting to see this also in the military domain with maintenance on vehicles or care for humans, that they are assisted by virtual reality or AI. In your case, there would still be a human decision making. So it's not entirely an autonomous weapon system. I think it's it could be it might be less problematic, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure if Frank agrees, but
I think if again depends on. I mean, that's what the HoloLens is doing. Microsoft working a lot with the US Army. And again, it all depends on the sort of information, how reliable the information is that is fed through this visual aids. But I mean, in principle, that, for example, maybe an easier example, logistics, where that can be done autonomously, I don't see a problem. There's no killing involved, and when that is making tasks of a soldier easier, I don't have a problem with it. It's mainly on the targeting of humans that's the problem for us.
Yeah, that's clear. Go ahead.
I have a question about the attritability of armed systems. So, for example, in the war in Ukraine, you see that a lot of attritable platforms are now being destroyed by either faraway guided systems or potentially AI guided systems. So would your framework, or how is your perspective on war in domains where it's highly complicated but not as complex that there is a risk of civil casualties, for example in Ukraine or in a potential China-US war in sea or in air? So how does attritability then relate to?
yeah.
Please explain attritability, at least for
Yeah,
me.
could
I'm
you-
not a 3-star military.
Yeah, I'm not
Go
sure. What do you mean with attritability? Like you can
What is that?
assign the
So for example, we don't have as much pilots available.
Yeah.
So an F-35 is very capable in overseeing the battlefield, but a pilot might not be capable to distribute all the munitions that a potential future mule would be able to carry.
Mm-hmm.
So then there would be an AI system involved to actually target and select and actually act before the pilot can act, or the pilot themselves is attrited or killed.
Yeah. Okay, so it's more from a distance that a human is still involved.
Yeah, then AI as a
Yeah.
modifier
Yeah, between
to prevent
human.
attrition for
Yeah.
humans.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you will, and that's also what's mentioned there, like environmental context or the battlefield that we're deploying it. Is I think some situations are less problematic because we have to abide by the law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law, and one of the things we have to specify, and that's what Frank also mentioned, is discrimination of targets. If I'm wearing this uniform, I'm a target, and it's lawful to take me out. If you're not wearing that uniform, it's not. And if you look at the front line of the Ukraine, when you have the like the loopgraven, the trenches,
yeah.
it's very clear that that's a war zone. So everybody who's in there is either a combatant or, I hope not, is lost. Because, but then you can start arguing, is it then lawful to have a modifier or an autonomous weapon system? And it might actually be upholding the laws of armed conflict. And then you could say, okay, it's allowed. Because there are a lot of type of weapons that are allowed under the Geneva Conventions that you might, from an ethical perspective, question, but apparently we all agreed upon that we're allowed to use those. And if you put on a uniform, you know that you're subject to those laws. So that's the situation that you sketch might actually be an example in which it could be lawful to use these type of weapons. And that's also what the obligations there try to specify in which types it is or is not. But you still might target people that they would say, okay, so it's prohibited. I think people is still very broad. Or do you mean combatants? Do you mean non-combatants? So that would be, for me as a military person, needs to be more specific.
Okay. And what do you think about there is a machine, I don't know what's called, at the North Korean border. It's deployed by South Korea. I think it's a robot.
Sentry robot.
Yeah.
What?
Sentry robot
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is able to distinguish any
No.
intruders.
It can exactly, and also shoot them.
Yeah.
And yeah,
If you enter that zone and you move, you're being
yeah.
shot.
Whether you're wearing a military suit
Or
or
not.
an ordinary
Yeah.
suit, you're dead. So this is not allowed by Geneva Convention, I think.
If it does not discriminate between targets, then it's not
No.
allowed.
No.
No.
Okay. Okay. There was one question over here. Go ahead.
I got a question about the time, the response time between action and human reaction. That gets smaller and smaller. But what's going to happen when it becomes negative?
Negative. Wow.
Yeah,
That's a
well, we
deep
go
philosophical.
small, we go
question.
to zero, and then you could have the situation, then you go negative. So you have to react in the future.
You have to predict the future. And wow, Ilse, are you also addressing this issue,
No.
or shall we start with shortening reaction times?
Yeah, that's
I think
actually
that's already a very big problem.
yeah, that's already happening.
Yes.
You see the speed of decision making, and the Israeli
Yes,
example
was a
is
good
an example
example,
of that.
yeah.
And that's, I think, maybe Frank can comment. The time and space limitations are under discussion, and I don't think we have agreed upon, but we know
Yeah.
that there should be a certain time of deliberation between taking out a target.
Yeah.
And preemptive,
But-
it's almost preemptive
Yes,
striking.
yeah,
that we also had examples of those, and I don't think that would be preferable. But
Could you give one example of a preemptive strike?
yeah, we have those.
Okay.
We had those in the past. Like they did just okay. This might be a problem in the future, so we're taking
We will
out preemptively.
eliminate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But what happens when the West, for instance, we have all regulated. Everything is in the Geneva Convention or in the UN regulations. And then we have a enemy who has no regulations. Who deploys AI, has swarm of drones, fully automated, not very precise algorithms, and they are going to attack the West. What do you do? Then you have to do the same, I think, or can you comment on this issue? Because I think that will be a problem.
That will always be,
That-
has
yeah,
always been
it
a
has
problem.
always been a problem,
There's
of
always
course.
spoilers,
Yes, not playing by
people,
the rules.
states, groups that
Yes.
don't want to cooperate.
Yeah,
but then what's the alternative?
yes,
Just
the-
Wild
the-
West, where everybody is just doing what. So that's why I think this should be the framework. It's not the solution for everything, but without it, it's only
It
going to
will
be
be
worse.
wo-
And I
yeah.
think what is a very good example of how it has proven to be working is with chemical weapons.
yeah. that's
That
good,
was always considered as the poor country's weapon of mass destruction.
Mm.
And again, after many, many years of negotiations, we have a treaty since 1993, I believe. And except for 3 countries in the world, all countries are abiding, are state party. And still some of these state parties, you can doubt whether they fully abide to the treaty, but it's there, it has set a norm. It's for almost everybody completely unacceptable to use chemical weapons. And so I think that norm setting is very important as a reference point.
Yeah.
And again, without it, we might have had 120 countries with chemical weapons
yeah.
that may have used them at many times.
Yeah, and the same applies for nuclear weapons as well. Yeah. Okay, very good. You already, yeah, maybe first, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So today AI is being used as a tool for any kind of in the warfare or battlefield. I mean, the one that used this is accountable for the destruction cost. Maybe tomorrow, if AI is good enough to mimic human conscious and makes the decision, are we soon going to see laws for AI? Or I understand today we have treaties between countries, but are we going to soon have some kind of governance over the decision made by AI?
Well,
Good
Thanks.
question. Yeah,
Good, yeah.
and that's actually if you look at the treaty, and it's amongst states parties, so amongst countries, but there are also a lot of entities, and this is one example of them, but also terrorist groups who can build these type of weapons and are not governed by it. So I think we have to set norms and red lines which you should not cross, and not try to create those. But that discussion is still going on. And if you see the countries who are either opposed to the vote or who are abstaining from the vote, there are a lot of people who actually maybe have benefits from these type of weapons, or at least technological developments that could be weapons. So it's very difficult, especially when you look at the tech companies, and you mentioned some examples. It's not just states who should be regulated. There's also a lot of tech companies who are in the whole AI business, and you see these type of systems are relatively cheap to construct, especially when you look at drones and weapons and under drones. And if you're a smart programmer, you can actually program a drone to fly autonomously, while if you look at chemical weapons or nuclear weapons, there's a quite big threshold to actually develop them. So I think I can understand that we look at parallels, but it's often not. It's much cheaper to fabricate these type of weapons than the other examples
the other ones.
mentioned,
Yeah.
which is even more problematic in this type in this field.
Okay, that's not really reassuring. I first go to him, then I'll come back to you. Yeah, so there you are.
I wanted to ask actually, have there been cases in known history where such a treaty was achieved without it actually happening? So like chemical weapons, First World War really happened, nuclear happened. So have there been cases where this succeeded?
I know
Before it
just
happened?
one, which are blinding laser weapons. They were banned also in the early 90s, I believe. Before it was seen as a potential problem, and I don't think they've ever been used like that, but they were banned before. So, but that's a tiny example of it. No, and the reality, that's the other side of the coin, is that indeed it seems like things need to go really bad before humanity really sees the urgency to do something about it, unfortunately.
Yeah. I have one question in connection with this. Cyber warfare, you can use AI, I think, in a very clever way for cyber warfare. For instance, a deep fake of Zelensky calling his army to put down the weapons. That's just an example. Ilse, I'm very curious. Are you also, you're studying AI on the battlefield, so usually we think about drones and autonomous weapons, etc. But AI can, I think, also be used for cyber warfare. Is that also in your department, or how does it work?
Yeah, I know that there are some research institutions looking at that, because it's not just like an AI deploying cyber units, but also like anomaly detection of a network. For example, are we being DDoSed, or is like TU Eindhoven detecting very quickly that something is wrong on the network? So there's an autonomous component. It's even more complicated in the cyber domain, because attribution to certain parties or states or countries is very difficult. And people are not sharing incidents. I haven't seen any like autonomous weapons in the cyber domain, but it's just software. So I cannot exclude it completely that it might happen. But
yeah, I was just wondering if it might happen. Okay. Yes, here you are.
Thanks. I have another 2 questions. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'll keep this short. The first question is on how further with your framework. Do you have it applied in Commit, for example, if with all the material they buy, or is it in Diana, the investment fund for NATO? Where is the step next for your framework? That's the
first question.
Let's
start with this one.
And the second question, how would...
Shall we first do this question? Yeah?
I know that they're looking at it and applying it. I'm not quite sure how far they are, but I know that people have contacted me and they said, we're working on it, thanks for creating it.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the second question, we are still part of NATO. Hopefully US will be as well. But what if the US decides to implement artificial intelligence in automated platforms? And we would have to fight a war alongside of them. How would the Netherlands, or from your perspective, how would that steer the battlefield for the Dutch armed forces?
Yep, last question.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's more a policy question or a political question. I don't know. I think something like that should happen before we can make I can do a guess, but that. Yeah. But it's a good question. Maybe we should start thinking about it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. One more question, and then we have to round off because you have to catch a train. So, here you are.
Is not one of the biggest threat or risk what we see on this kind of technology, who will be the market leader on AI technology for the future. So China will be the market leader in 2030, they say, and I believe they will be. And who will have the latest software, can manipulate all the existing autonomous weapons, what is available on the market. And you see it now already on the battlefield, already in Ukraine, for the jamming and anti-jamming systems, but still make more use of AI technology, how you can switch very fast on frequency so that you can jam and anti-jam your weapons.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it sounds a bit like a rhetorical question, and I agree, it looks like that. And the fact is that back in 2015-16, China was one of the countries that was supporting a treaty. And then over time it took longer and longer, and there was too much resistance from Russia and the US mainly, and Israel and South Korea. And I think now, but China thinks we take a back seat. We are not in a hurry because we are in a dominant position, and that's a chance that I think at least Western countries have let go. And
Okay. One final rounding off question. It's a short question, but I think it's very difficult for you to answer, but I'm going to ask it. What will the future of war look like? What do you think will happen?
Do you want a positive answer or?
It's up to you.
I find it hard to see it. I mean,
You
just
don't-
look back at the last 2 years, what
Mhm.
we've seen, and compare it to
Mhm.
whatever, 20 years ago when things
Mhm.
maybe looked a bit better. No, but I can only hope with what we've seen from the UN General Assembly that there is a large majority of states that want limits to weaponized use of artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
I'm still hoping that it's happened. It may be without the US, it may be without China, it may be without a couple of others,
Mhm.
but that's better than nothing.
Mm.
But will it end wars? No, not immediately,
No.
certainly. No.
Ilse, are you thinking about this question? Because it's your job to
Yeah.
defend the country, so you
Yeah.
must visualize possible futures which you can anticipate.
Yeah, but you see that war is still the same as it always was in trenches, like that we've seen that 100 years ago. There's still a large human factor decisive on the battlefield, but you see more and more technologies being introduced and added to the like almost the military toolbox.
Mhm.
We have to prepare for those to counter those, but also that's what you see in the Ukraine. People will still be developing them.
Mhm.
I think the technology will drive those developments forward, and we have to counter them.
Yes, yeah. Very, very exciting times for you. I already read there's a third revolution going on in warfare. First you had the gunpowder revolution, then you had the atomic bomb, and now we have the AI revolution in warfare. So that's a very, very exciting, sometimes frightening development. Big issues, and the biggest question is, of course, can regulations keep up the technological pace? I want to thank you both. Frank Sijper, Ilse Verdiesen, thank you for sharing your insights on this worrying subject, so to say. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thanks for your questions, and see you next time.